Hello there, I'm Kevin May. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of PhocusWire. Welcome to our fifth PhocusWire Pulse event, where we take a deep dive into an issue or important element of the industry that has an impact on every one of your businesses. Our Pulse events, which are sponsored by Salesforce, thank you very much to them, started in February this year and are designed to complement the large conferences that our sister brand PhocusWire produces in Europe, which we had online in June. I'm sure many of you saw that, and in the US in November. My colleague and boss, Pete Como, he's the Managing Director of PhocusWire, will be here at the end of today's Pulse to talk about our return to live events in Florida in November, as I said. Last time out, Pulse concentrated on the theme of security, a critical component of the travel industry these days as hackers become more sophisticated and our systems are required to protect and counteract the threats of these so-called bad actors. This month's Pulse looks at no less an important part of the travel, tourism and hospitality sector, and that's the role of payments. It's perhaps easy to sometimes gloss over the influence, but often unseen part that payments plays in the mechanics that underpin every part of the industry. It obviously allows consumers to book their trips, but also ensures the flow of money around the sector does so smoothly and safely. Increasingly, as new forms of payments come into vogue, travel brands need to also make sure they're meeting the needs of their customers with how they want to pay, whether it be via a payment plan, different devices or different formats. In today's Pulse event, Progress in Travel Payments, we have 6 sessions for you designed to come at the various facets of the online payments arena from various different directions. So your agenda is as follows. First up, my colleague Mitra Sorrells discusses why now is a time for a change in hospitality payments. That's with her guest, Mike Carlo of XanderPay. We then have a panel discussion hosted by our friend and colleague Suhun Yeo of Web in Travel, which was actually recorded a few weeks ago. It's titled Navigating the Payments Ecosystem in Asia, and it features speakers from Traveloka, Global Tix, Ducit International and NTT Data. I'll then be back to chat with Sophia Melis of Fly Now Pay Later as we take a look at the growing trend for delayed payment options for travellers. Our senior reporter Linda Fox then takes us through 2 sessions. She'll first discussing the emerging role of fintech and payments for consumer-facing travel brands. That's with Daniel Markovits of Booking.com, who is heading up the company's recently announced department for fintech. Then she'll be talking with Will Plummer, he's the CEO of Trust My Travel, about maintaining trust in shopping and booking travel from a payments perspective. You'll then get me again for our final session, where we get a big picture overview of the landscape in payments with our longtime collaborator in a number of areas around payments that we've featured at PhocusWire, and that's Thomas Heldorf of WorldPay from FIS. As I noted just now, Pete Como will be sent us on our merry way at the end of today's Pulse. Excuse me. These events do not happen without some considerable effort from lots of people. So as always, thank you very much to Gene Coe behind the scenes for his production work and excellent music selection, as well as his colleagues on the marketing team at Focusrite and PhocusWire. Of course, to Mitra and Linda and Jill for their hard work and support with programming and participating in all our Pulse events. Plus, of course, all our guests. It is your enthusiasm and expertise that makes these events so good and important for viewers here today. Also, our appreciation, of course, to Salesforce supporting this series of events from PhocusWire. And yes, finally, thanks to all of you for tuning in today. We hope you find Progress in Travel Payments a valuable use of your time. Okay, that's it. Take it away, Gene.
Thanks so much, Kevin, and welcome everyone to this first session of this month's PhocusWire Pulse event. I am joined by industry veteran Mike Carlo, founder and CEO of XanderPay, which provides payment solutions for the hospitality industry. And as some quick background, Mike's past experience includes working for WEX, TransPay, Onyx CenterSource, and he's on the board of Hedna, where he has led payment efforts for nearly 10 years. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Mitra. And it's always good to be called a veteran because that just means I'm getting old.
Okay. We've certainly heard and covered a lot about issues related to payments in the last 18 months, related to refunds, cancellations, cash flow. Can you start us off by talking about some of the weaknesses or inefficiencies that the pandemic exposed as far as how payments are handled in the travel industry?
Yeah, I think that the biggest, looking back over the past 18 months, the biggest weakness was really a lack of foresight and contingency planning. And then, the reaction time in order to try to do things once we realized that we didn't have contingency plans as an industry. If you think about the airlines, they had mass refunds, and then a number of the OTAs had mass refunds that they had to go through, which was awful. The hotels didn't have mass refunds because they generally just had cancellations on bookings that would have been paid upon checkout. Yeah, I think you can argue that the airlines had a more difficult job, but they also had more options in that they could have held on to some of the cash and rebooked, provided vouchers, where the hotels were just without any options at that point. And I think when we look at the inefficiencies, the fractured processes for payments at hotels were really challenging to the hotel owners, the hotel brands, and especially to the travelers. And I know we'll go through that in a bit more detail, but I really do think it was the lack of any sense of contingency planning on a global level.
Okay, so let's talk about maybe, hindsight is 2020. What could have been done? What should have been done? What can be done for the future?
Well, I guess we need to move away from hindsight being 2020 to maybe hindsight needs to be 2022. So if I look at it from and the session is focused on hospitality payments, the hotels have long had this payment philosophy where you paid at the end of a trip, you paid at the property, and that goes through some of the legacy issues with relationships with hotel owners. One of the things that we've really been advocating over, well, advocating is probably a strong word, bringing up for consideration over the past 5 years is for a hotel brand to start to operate more like an OTA with regard to payments. I think that eliminates a lot of the problems. I think for instance, if you're a consumer and you're going to brand X in Paris and you book a room and the brand passes your credit card details along to one of the hotels, if that hotel goes out of business, you as a consumer have to battle with your credit card company to get your funds back. The hotel brand looks bad, and they may have 7 other hotels in the city that they could have reaccommodated you at. So I think part of the payment landscape has really been very much a legacy of 10, 15, 100 years ago, and I think that we're seeing an increased interest by the hospitality brands to try to envision things differently going forward.
Okay, can you explain just a bit more about that statement of, to operate more like the OTAs? I mean, so are you saying that, payment should be more upfront? It should be more at the brand level?
Yeah, I mean, I think the consumer is entering into a loyal consumer is entering into an agreement with a brand, not necessarily with an individual property. And when we talk about as part of some of the industry discussions we have, and we have a guest-centric industry working group, we talk about centralizing payments at a brand level, the way an OTA would be. So you have a brand X that would process payments for all of its properties and sell all of its properties, offering payment methods based on where the guest is coming from, not where the property is located. So effectively taking the OTA model of payments and applying it to a hotel brand. Because right now, I know of very few hotel brands that process payments centrally. Instead, they still process everything at a property level. And there are cross-border implications of that and inefficiencies, and you don't have data about chargebacks. You don't have data about auth rates. It's a very complicated structure and inefficient, I would say.
Yeah, and so I know when we've talked in the past, you've really focused on the opportunities for more personalization and particularly related to payment methods and things with people, internationally traveling. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think one of the examples that I like to use is is really the outbound Chinese traveler. Um, so WeChat Pay, Alipay are super prevalent in that in that country.
Yeah.
Apologies. And if you have a Chinese guest going to a brand hotel in Beijing, they can use their phone and they can you know pay for that room and check in for that room in Beijing with WeChat Pay or Alipay. That same guest going to the same brand, to the same app on their phone, booking a room at a property in London is not usually able to use WeChat Pay or Alipay because those aren't payment methods offered by the British hotel. And so, that's an interesting example of a situation where that is very extreme, but I think it's very illustrative. What a lot of hotel brands do in that situation is they refer the guest to, or if not refer, encourage or push a guest to an OTA to make that booking because the guest can pay with WeChat Pay on an OTA in market.
And so let's also talk about, one of the other issues that you referenced is the cash flow issue in the hospitality industry. So are you saying then that potentially in the future, the hospitality industry should be moving more to that airline model of pay when you book?
This is my personal view, not the views of any associations that I'm involved with. It might be the view of my company. Yes. I think that we have this false choice set up that prepaid bookings are non-refundable or prepaid bookings are a lower rate. If you look at the airline business, first class tickets are prepaid, and fully cancelable tickets are prepaid. So I do think that as more consumer alternate forms of payment are adopted around the world, and if you look at the cash flow concerns going forward, I really think the industry needs to move toward a centralized guest-focused payment strategy, and I do think that I do think we need to move away from this postpaid model. It's one of very few products where you pay after the product is consumed.
Yeah, I'd imagine it all comes down to just transparency as far as terms and conditions and cancellation possibilities and all of that, which I know is going to be discussed in some of our upcoming sessions. You just referenced their alternative payment options. Can we talk a bit about that? What do you see happening, and particularly any preferences developing related to some of the younger generations and how they want to pay and the implications there?
Yeah, I think the alternate payment options, like the Chinese example before, they're going to be very country specific. And if you're a U.S. hotel that has 99% U.S. travelers, the whole notion of alternate forms of payment isn't as important. But if you have Dutch guests traveling or Canadian guests visiting, there are different payment options, and certainly there's foreign currency implications. But as far as generationally, I know Venmo is. I'd love to pay with everything with Venmo, but the reality is Venmo, Apple Pay, they all have an underlying standard payment method behind them. So I think I view that to be more of a a mechanism than a payment method.
Okay. What about, we've heard a lot about the blurring of the lines between business travel and leisure travel, particularly in the last year and a half, as many people can work from anywhere and combine that with a vacation, that sort of thing, as travel starts to reopen. Any issues that creates or opportunities?
I think that's a great question, and I think it means that there'll be higher average transaction values because people will lump, a few weeks holiday onto a business trip. But I think from a payment standpoint, it's largely, going to be business as usual. I think from an expense report standpoint, it's going to require a bit more analysis of expense reports on behalf of controllers and others in each company.
Okay, so let's talk also about B2B payments in hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the issues there, or some of the trends that you're seeing?
Well, I mean, you mentioned transparency, so I'll share that we are focused on B2B payments, and the industry groups that I've been involved with, and the philosophy of our company is to look at B2B payments and right size the cost of a payment with the commensurate risk. In the past 10 years, there's been a growth of virtual credit cards, and virtual credit cards are an amazing product for many solutions, but they are an expensive product, especially in markets with exotic currencies. So we're trying to create a fairness between the hotel and the OTA or other third-party booking that's based on the risk of it. So with a virtual credit card model, the OTA issues the card, pays to the hotel runs that card through its ordinary credit card processing channels, and they pay a standard. Well, they pay an average rate for those cards, and then the model for the VCC is then there's a rebate back to the OTA. So the OTA is receiving a commission, and then they're receiving a fairly significant portion of the interchange back as a referral fee for issuing that card. We've taken an approach, and this isn't designed to be a sales pitch, but we have taken an approach that there needs to be a better balance, and we need to look at the risks associated with that. Everything can be automated with the growth in technology. There's a lot of opportunity for automating processes where we weren't able to before. And just to give you a sense, HEDNA and HDNG just issued technical specifications for industry standard operation of a payment manager, which is designed to create a more efficient B2B payment processing solution, so that the hotels won't be receiving faxes from OTAs and silly things like that.
Yeah, I forget that there's still fax machines out there.
Yes, it's remarkable.
Yeah. So, you've talked about a lot of potential ideas and strategies here. I'm wondering now if we can talk a bit about, so what are some of the hurdles to this innovation? And I also wonder has the pandemic accelerated some of this, or has it actually put a bit of a stall because, resources are tight and all of that?
That is a fantastic question. And I will say that in a panel discussion probably about 4 months ago, someone from a major hotel brand said something that I'm going to paraphrase. Prior to the pandemic, the biggest challenge with innovation in hospitality payments was inertia, and things had been largely the same for decades, if not back 2,000 years. During pandemic and post pandemic, there is no inertia. And because of that, I think we're seeing an opportunity for innovation in the next couple of years. We're seeing historically the hotel owners, I shouldn't say the hotel owners, the brand's fear of the reaction of the hotel owners had driven a lot of hesitancy. The other thing we're also seeing now is hotel owners, because of the horrible economic conditions that they've been in for the past 18 months, are more open to suggestions on how they can be more efficient. Okay. So we are extraordinarily hopeful that this is the opportune time for a change.
And I'm curious, some of these issues that you've raised, are they fairly universal, or are they more, regionally based, or, concentrated in certain markets that are maybe some are more ahead versus behind?
Yeah, I think they're fairly global. There will be markets that are, largely self-sustaining, like the U.S. market, where that's a bit, there isn't the percentage of cross-border guests, and a lot of these efficiencies drive out of that group of folks. But in general, I think it's a global initiative, and I think that the savings that can be generated through a guest-centric approach, centralized approach, are going to be comparable in most countries and hotel brands. Properties even.
Yeah. One thing I'm realizing I didn't really address, because a lot of your references have been to brands, and I'm assuming, some hotels associated with the chains, that sort of thing. Anything just related to some of the independent properties that comes to mind, as we've got a couple minutes left?
Yeah, the independent properties, it's a little bit more challenging because of, the card scheme rules and banking rules. I think there may be somebody on your panel discussion later who better address this, but I think there are companies out there that are trying to enable the smaller hotels or the individual hotels with more global solutions, but that is something it would be very difficult for them to do on their own, given regulatory requirements.
Okay. So as we just have a couple minutes left, I'm wondering, just kind of recap for us, or share with us any of your predictions for the future, as far as any new technologies, new strategies. What are we going to be seeing develop in this space?
Yeah, I think the previously mentioned HEDNA HTNG technical specifications really do change the lay of the land for B2B transactions. And quite honestly, there's an opportunity there for hotel brands to centralize payments and use the same platform. I do think over the course of the pandemic, there has been quite a bit more transparency and understanding of what the inefficiencies are. I think what we will see is a couple of major brands will be disruptive. And as they are disruptive, as is so often the case in this industry, we expect that others will examine their solutions and try to implement something similar. I expect that in 3 to 5 years, the payment landscape of hospitality will be significantly different and far more efficient and much more guest focused. I mean, it really is one of the, for an industry that calls it hospitality, from a payment standpoint, it's incredibly inhospitable. So that's what I see coming up in the next 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it is one, if you think about it, there hasn't been, when I think about my experience as a consumer and traveling and booking and paying for a hotel, hasn't changed much.
No.
No.
And I think that some of the solutions that are coming out to make it easier for the consumer are great, but inevitably, when you have something that makes it easier for the consumer, it's somebody is going to try to what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that with some of these things, like the installment payments or some sort of credit products, they're great and they're very helpful, but there's a cost associated with them in some way, and we need to figure out who's going to bear the cost. Is it the consumer? Is it the hotel? And that's where I think there'll be a lot of modifications to what we're doing over the next few years.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Mike, very much for
Pleasure.
joining us. Appreciate it, and we will catch up with you in the future, see how things are developing. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in today in partnership with NTT Data. Today, we are talking payments. So COVID has changed many things in our lives for sure. And one of that is how we as consumers pay. And in Singapore, I can now practically go cashless, right? In the physical world, my favorite cafe takes Apple Pay. My favorite nasi lemak stall takes PayLah, and a myriad of QR codes is pasted on her stall. My physio encourages me to use Grab because it gives me bonus points. My doggy swimming pool place takes PayNow. Online, I buy with a swipe or a click or a double click. So in fact, my biggest headache as a consumer now is how to pay. Imagine then the headaches on the supplier side who are trying to keep up with our changing behavior. And that's just me in Singapore. You know, with a population of under 6 million, we have so many payment methods, too many in my opinion. So imagine markets like Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines, bigger populations. And then if you're in travel, it gets even more complex because, well, you know, your customers travel across borders. Well, at least they used to until now. So while payments have also gone local for now, cross-border payments remain a headache for travel suppliers, which is why today's topic is about navigating the complex payments ecosystem in Asia and how to localize and digitize. So, gentlemen, welcome to the panel, and you are all going to be doctors today. I am designated all of you as payment doctors because our task today is to try and solve as many headaches as possible around payments and to get to know each of you better. Ken, you've been in finance and hospitality for more than 20 years. So I was just feeling sorry for you, right? Because I'm thinking this proliferation of fintech and especially what happened in the last year, you know, has that created even more headaches for finance people like yourself managing a hospitality group across the world?
Yes, Sihun. I have been in this industry for the past 20 years with several international brands. And actually, I've witnessed the fast growing of the fintech developments that indeed has caused some headaches for the finance folks. But it is always a good problem to have, as this means there is an increase of a wider range of customer, especially the younger generations whom have more spending power. And this generates more revenue to our hotels and resorts. Why I say this is a good problem to have in this context? This is actually similar when credit cards was being introduced many years ago and widely used. And with this new digital platform being set up now by the bank or by the vendors in the hotels and resorts, there's certainly some challenges from both the installer and the user side. However, once this is smooth running, the benefits always outweigh the challenges faced at the beginning. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So can you talk to us about, you know, what is the biggest trend that you've seen in payments in your home base of Thailand due to COVID-19?
Yes, I would like to share my experience that the biggest payment trend that I've seen in Thailand for individual customer, in the hotels and resort, especially pre and post COVID-19, is actually the shift from traditional cash and credit card to QR code, e-wallets, even up to the debit cards, the way function the debit cards and so on, as long as they are contactless. And as we all know, this is as much as possible to spread off the virus.
Okay, all right. So, okay, let's move to CC and Global Ticks. You power tours and activities, highly fragmented. What's the biggest trend that you're seeing in payments in your sector?
I think I see two trends, right? The first trend is very similar to what Ken has mentioned, right? A lot of the operators, now they are looking at digital payment services. They used to be happy with MasterCard and Visa card, but now they want Grab Pay, they want Google Pay, Apple Pay, WeChat Pay, you name it, it's all pay, right? The second trend that we are seeing, it's more on the other side of the platform, which are the travel agents, right? They used to be happy with just having a base currency. I mean, let me give an example like Traveloka. Now they want to pay us for Singapore products in SGD, for Malaysia products in ringgit, for Japanese yen, Japanese product in yen, right? So the margins are so tight and so thin that they don't use a base currency anymore. They prefer to pay people in the local currencies, right? So these are the two trends that we are seeing: multi-currencies, paying in local currencies, and digital payment.
Okay, so Alvin, we go to you, and I know we have a lot of questions for you. And at WIT a few years ago, when fintech started, becoming the talk of the town, someone actually said that an OTA looks more and more like a fintech company now rather than just a travel company, right? And that seems to be the case with Traveloka. When I go to look at your financial services, I see you're offering Traveloka Pay, you have Steam Wallet, you have One Cool Balance Traveloka. So can you talk about the financial services that you're offering as an OTA right now?
Thank you, Sihun. Yeah, good point there. We are adding more and more financial services products in our platform, but not because we want the financial services to kind of like a standalone and build a financial services business on its own. But I think it all comes down to, initially, we look at what customers' needs are in the travel and lifestyle space, and we go from there. So, for example, the first financial service product we launched was actually insurance in 2015. I guess this is something very natural to travel, right? You travel, you want travel insurance. And then it starts expanding insurance as well. People are asking, hey, I'm traveling, my home is being left alone, there's nobody at home, can I have home insurance while I travel? So it evolves from the travel use case, actually. Second one, the lending, the buy now, pay later. That's also something we're doing. We started in 2018. Again, this came out of the user need. We see user complaints, a user request saying, hey, I want to buy travel for my family in installments. I need to manage my cash flow. Can you help me, considering there's just no option for installment in Indonesia context, for example. Credit card penetration is less than 5%. That's the only way you can do installment. Other than that, it's just cash. So we launched that, and it's been good so far. I mean, just to give you guys a sense, not only this solves a customer problem, this gets us a lot of retention and increases the lifetime value of customers. We see a customer before and after he or she uses Pay Later. After she uses Pay Later, his or her lifetime value more than double in terms of the frequency of transaction and also the ticket size that they buy, right? And then last but not least, I think as Traveloka, we are expanding further in terms of scope, not only handling travel in terms of flight and accommodation, but also dealing with lifestyle. So we position ourselves more as a lifestyle company. So there's a lot more small daily ticket size items, your daily attractions, your food and cinema. So for people to travel, enjoy themselves on a daily basis. And this requires a very, very specific payment solution. And hence we came up with our wallet, right? Just to give you a sense, if you book a cinema ticket, probably the cinema operators can only lock in that seat for 5 minutes. There's no way you can do a manual bank transfer, go to the banking app, and then you lose your seat by then. So a wallet was a good solution to tackle that kind of problem. So I think we have all those solutions. I mean, there's more like co-branded credit cards and so on and so forth, but ultimately it's coming from a user need. Yeah.
Interesting. So you're really sort of, responding to customer needs and coming up with products to meet those needs and finding value in the services that you've offered. So Anwi, let's go to you. What's the biggest trend that you've seen, speaking to your customers throughout Asia, that you've seen that's been accelerated by COVID?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, I think definitely a trend, I think, from COVID's effect is that, domestic services has increased online for sure. But you see a big, a drastic, drop in cross-border services. And I think the effect about that is that I think just because everybody is talking about going online and, to try to retain or at least to maintain the business, the big enterprises, as we've seen, is that they have actually taken this opportunity to look at and revamp their entire business process, right? So the end-to-end digitization, transformation of the business, taking an opportunity of digital payments as the part like the digital cash register, and taking the opportunity to look at end-to-end process. So if you look at it from not just from a payments perspective, but also on a payables part. I mean, how do we put all this together digitally on a single platform, reconciliation, reporting, so on and so on.
Okay, so let's get into the section about headaches, right? Because clearly it's thrown up a lot of headaches, a lot of opportunity, but clearly a lot of headaches. I'm going to ask the audience now for a poll. So we're going to go to the audience to understand also what is their biggest headache when it comes to payments, right? And then I'm going to ask each of you to pick one headache that you have, or two if you have a lot of headaches, but I'm only going to limit you to two, okay, because we have a limited time. And you can ask each of the panelists the answers to your problem. So CC, we're going to start with you. At the same time, I'm going to ask the audience out there, if you have a headache that's not listed in the poll, can you type in your headache into the chat? And then we will try and answer and try and solve your headaches as well. So, okay, so we got multi-currency issues coming out. I mean, CC, you hit the jackpot, man. So let's start with you. Your biggest headache, and you can ask the questions now.
Okay, my biggest headache is multi-currency. I mean, if you look at Europe, right, they have Euro to solve their problem, right? And if you look at America, USD generally works in the entire America. But oh my gosh, when it comes to Asia, right, you have your rupiah, you have your rupee, you have your controlled currencies like renminbi and won, right? So my question is, first question is to Alvin, right? How do you, when Traveloka sells a product to, let's say, a Thai citizen in Thai baht, a product that is in Japan, right, Universal Studio Osaka, how do you manage this multi-currency and currency exchange? Do you have tools behind? With currency movement, will you lose the money because of that and things like that? How do you go about solving this in Traveloka?
Okay, Alvin, over to you.
Thanks, CC. Yeah, this is something that's very interesting for us, and I think this is something that we are still learning and we're still figuring out, to be honest with you. How we're doing it right now is, let's say, like you said, two different currencies, we need to settle in a different currency, a customer buys from a different currency. We actually determine our internal FX rate by sourcing this rate from third-party financial data provider. And we put a very thin markup on top. Right. So this thin markup is not for the purpose of seeking extra profit or value, but it's more to hedge the risk, right, for absorbing short-term volatility during the period from customer booking and then from to settlement. So I think that's what we're doing right now. But in the future, as we go along, we want to introduce using value at risk methods, which we are still developing, working with our partners. So long story short, that's how we do it. Not rocket science, but we try our best, I guess.
This headache. Let's move to the second headache. And Ken, I think you picked also, the two that are mentioned here, which is high cost barrier and fraud. So Ken, who do you want to direct? Let's ask the question, and we get Alvin to answer it from how Traveloka handles it.
Yeah, maybe to Alvin, our biggest headache is credit card fraud. From time to time, we do face, in terms of online payment, credit card fraud, which I believe hackers and organized crimes are consistently finding ways to beat the system. And they are occasionally successful, maybe due to the hotel operators or the employees' oversight. So that means losing money at the hotel end. So perhaps Alvin can share with us his experience and a solution to that problem.
Okay. Thanks, Ken, for the question. So It's quite a big problem in the travel industry, right? As I understand, this credit card fraud, and in fact, for us, payment fraud, all types of payment fraud is something we're looking at. For this fraud specifically, we do quite a few things that has helped, and we're continuing to improve. First, we use a combination of third-party technology and our internal technology. For third-party technology, I think there's a few out there that we can explore. For internal, I think that the value is we match the third-party technology, which is off-the-shelf solution, with the internal data that we have. So, for example, we know the patterns of this person's transactions. We know exactly this person usually travels from point A to point B, from this city to this city, right? On some sort of frequency on a monthly basis, for example. If suddenly there's a shift in some kind of behavior, we'll be able to detect it and say, hey, this transaction might be a fraudulent transaction. Not only the frequency, the destination, the star of the hotel, the type of airline, that's also something we take as an input, right? Secondly, we also develop our internal I would say customer data management database where we extract customers' data in terms of mobile behavior, right? When do they purchase, IP address, and all that stuff, and location. We use the GPS also in the mobile app to figure out if a transaction is valid or not. Ultimately, it's a balance between your fraud rate versus your approval rate, reject rate, and try to figure out what makes sense for the business.
Clearly, there's huge opportunity in the payment space right now, but that opportunity can only be realized by all of us if we bring our partners along, right? CC, Ken, Alvin, and you, and Anwi, you got to bring the industry along to grow that pie and grow that space for everybody, because we can't do it on our own, right? So as the beginning, when Kai Wei talked about, seeing all these partnerships, that's really important. And I guess that's why we are doing this event in partnership with NTT Data. And I want to thank our panelists, Alvin, Ken, CC, and Anwi, for really providing such wisdom and insights into, trying to solve headaches. And I hope that we have solved some of the headaches of of the audience out there. And remember, you can always contact Whit if you, feel that you have certain issues that you still want to address. So in the meantime, thank you for joining us. And I hope that we have resolved some of your headaches.
Hi, Kevin.
Sophia Mellis, head of partnerships. Head of partnerships for Europe and the US at Fly Now, Pay Later. Thank you very much for joining us on PhocusWire Pulse. Let's dive straight in. We don't have very long. So I just wondered, first of all, Sophia, if you could just talk us through the appeal of the buy now, pay later concept as you kind of see it at the moment, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Just wanted to say first, thanks for having me on here. And yeah, so I think the benefits are twofold, right? I mean, their benefits are for the customer and there are benefits for the travel merchant, right? And I think obviously the benefits for the customer are in turn benefits for the travel merchant, because if it's a benefit for the customer, it's going to benefit the airline or OTA or whatever. But I think first and foremost, I mean, for the customer, it's a lower upfront cost. And this has existed in travel forever, right? I mean, a lot of times, maybe less so in the States, but there's been a deposit payment you can make, and then you can pay more up until you travel. And with buy now, pay later, you're less restricted in terms of when you can make the payment, but it's a lower upfront cost. So I think in travel, a lot of times we'll see people will be shopping for a trip and have 15 different tabs open and go around until they can find the cheapest and lowest price. And if you have this opportunity to instantly spread the cost, you're not going to maybe be searching as far as if you were to just see it right on the spot, right? And instead of paying maybe £500 to travel to Mexico next year, you can pay £100 today and not pay it all immediately. And then obviously for travel brands, the benefit for that is they can sell more trips and they can have sort of a competitive edge on maybe some of their competitors who don't offer this payment solution. To summarize.
Now, what I think is quite interesting and summarized very well. I mean, one thing I find quite interesting about this kind of concept is the kind of the geography of it all, by which I mean, the pay later, buy now concept has been around for quite a long time in Europe. I mean, many of the big tour operators, the Thomas Cooks, may it rest in peace, very, very years to kind of do that.
Sorry, Kevin, I think you cut out there briefly.
You're back now.
You
Okay.
certainly did. Right, we'll try that again if we may. So I just wondered if you could talk us through the kind of the geographic considerations. So in Europe, the buy now, pay later concept has been around for a long time. Major tour operators, Thomas Cook, TUI, those kind of companies had this concept for a long time. But we go back 2 or 3 years, and lots of other brands, especially in North America, have kind of caught on to this. UFOC have had funding, Affirm has had funding, Uplift has had funding. It seems to be something that's kind of happened in the last 2 or 3 years pre-pandemic. What's kind of happened to bring this kind of concept back into the mainstream, as it were?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it makes sense to have installment payment for travel. I mean, usually when you buy something, you're getting it immediately. But with travel, if you're booking ahead and you're trying to get the lowest possible price, you're not going to get it for quite some time. I mean, it could be up to a year. So I think that the model of having to kind of pay over time, it really is most conducive to travel, because you're not going to be getting what you're paying for quite some time for now. So I think that's why this model has existed forever. And I think in Europe, obviously, it's more popular because these tour operators, as it exists, it's more of a European thing. So Thomas Cook, TUI offering this model, they're doing that to best serve their customers. And I think now it's coming into the States because we don't necessarily have. I mean, obviously we have some of them. We have large tour operators there, but it's more dispersed through different airlines, OTAs, et cetera. So I think that these third-party payment providers have come in because they've recognized that this model has worked well in the industry before. And also by coming in and offering this service for a travel brand, we are able to take on the risk and, other not so glamorous things that are associated with installment payment, right? So I think that this is something that we've obviously seen work before, and it's successful now because the model of it is conducive to travel.
Tell us, Sophia, is there a particular segment or sector within the industry where it's more popular than others? If we think of airlines, hotels, or, we just mentioned tour operating and the travel agency kind of fed world into tour operating. Is there a particular sector that it's been kind of taken up by customers and brands as well? Yeah.
So obviously with hotels, I think the payment for hotels is kind of a little more, I don't want to say disjointed, but it's not as straightforward as it necessarily is with booking, a flight online, right? Because sometimes with hotels, you'll pay a deposit, you'll pay more there. So I think definitely this model is great. It's particularly popular with airlines. I know a lot of airlines have shown interest in our brand, particularly in recent months, because they're trying to increase direct sales. And so, by offering a flexible payment plan that maybe other OTAs that are also selling their flights aren't offering, they're able to kind of have this one up on them and be able to offer something unique that will incentivize the customer to book directly with them as the airline than on an OTA. But having said that, obviously, a lot of OTAs are using the similar buy now, pay later schemes. And that is also to kind of get this lowest upfront cost. So I would say any segment where the customer would traditionally have to pay the full price up front, but is able to then stagger their payment, that is who it's most popular for. So because hotels, it's not as always as linear. Airlines and OTAs, are probably our most popular segments.
We've done very well. We're 6 minutes into this interview and we haven't mentioned COVID. So let's mention COVID now if we can.
Times are changing.
Apologies. So, but I think it's an important thing. So, can you talk us through maybe some of the ways in which the pandemic and this kind of now nearly, 18-month period has impacted, the products and the features and the different kind of service functions and the business objectives around this, if at all? And maybe it hasn't, but I'm assuming it has.
Well, I mean, obviously, COVID has been incredibly difficult on the travel industry, and we only serve the travel industry, so it's been hard. But I think that we have been able to kind of collect more investment and seen an uptick in interest is because this is, I don't want to try to shed a positive light on COVID at all, but for buy now, pay later, it is a great option. And I think COVID has really kind of shown the importance, or, highlighted this desire of people to kind of maybe safeguard their spend. And instead of paying, job security isn't, I don't want to touch on job security and as it relates to spreading the cost of a payment, but people are less likely. I mean, just the fact of the matter is people are less likely to just go out and shell £1,000 right now on a ticket. And so by spreading the cost, they're able to, they're not spending that 1,000 immediately. They're going to spend 100 immediately. And then they can kind of see how it goes. If their flight gets canceled, if something happens, then it's easier for them to get that money back. And there's less of an upfront cost. So I think that, that COVID has done that. I think also with, in terms of people using buy now, pay later in light of COVID, we serve as a barrier. I mean, this is for travel merchants too, because it's been just as hard on them as it is for people trying to travel.
Right.
So we serve as a sort of intermediary between the customer and the airline. So it's like an extra level of support, and that's on both sides. I mean, we fight. I don't want to say fight, but we support our clients and whatever clients as in airlines, OTAs, in whatever way possible. But also, we're here to support our customers too. So if they're getting a refund on their airline ticket, we're going to refund them the money on whatever they're paying, or we're going to tell them they don't have to keep making payments if they're not traveling. So it's like we offer breathing space on both sides to the customers and then also to the travel brands.
There's been a lot of discussion already just between you and I of what are the great opportunities here, whether it's for consumers or the brands themselves. But there must be some kind of challenges involved for the brands and the customers as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there absolutely are, and I think it's kind of getting people to believe in the concept and trust a third party to manage something that is as touchy as payments. So for the travel merchant, it's like, okay, like we're going to have these guys. I mean, we pay them. The way our model works is we pay them immediately the full basket value of the booking, right? So it's getting them to kind of be like, does this payment actually work? Or are they going to try to issue I don't want to say the word, but chargebacks? Like what's going on here? So I think it's just it's gaining the trust from the travel merchant and then also from the consumer. That's the biggest barrier. But I mean, but in general, across all industries, not even travel, we've seen a huge increase in the presence of buy now, pay later. It's everywhere. I mean, and I used to associate it personally with like higher ticket items, like, or higher priced items, like, buying a car or financing a TV or something. But I think now we see it as like, on ASOS or on any like sort of fashion e-commerce sites, like for, prices at like as much as £60, we're seeing things financed. So I think that has also helped build trust in the industry in general. It's just kind of seeing it all over and across all different verticals.
Does it have, say if you're an airline or a tour operator, there's often a very complex and convoluted way that money flows around the ecosystem, whether it's from the agent to the airline or from the agent to the tour operator, or in the hotel sense, it doesn't get paid until after the stay.
Right.
We could I have a whole session just talking about the crazy mechanics of the way money moves around the industry. But with what you're doing here, does that change anything? Is that something that brands need to be aware of, the way that they pay their own suppliers or indeed other people that are part of the payment system?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm glad you're asking this because there is a lot of confusion around that. And even when I first started working at Fly Now Pay Later, like mapping out the payment landscape of some of these brands, I was like, have like elaborate flow charts, and it's really hard to kind of comprehend. And it's also not a one size fits all model. It's different for every single company. So I think the best answer for this is that, you know, implementing, I mean, at least I can speak to our buy now, pay later solution, but I think across the board, it doesn't have any impact on it. So if a customer selects to choose buy now, pay later checkout, they go through the payment, they complete the booking, we pay them with a virtual card. And that works the exact same as a customer paying them with a debit card. So that they get the money immediately and they can disperse with it as they please. So it doesn't change the overall payment flow.
Has there been any hesitancy from travel brands to adopt this model? Because, you know, if there wasn't any hesitancy at all, every brand would do it. Yeah. So, you know, what are some of the questions that you get from them if they're slightly unsure about doing it?
Well, as I'm sure you know, like the travel industry overall is relatively antiquated. And I mean, the systems that they use, and I don't mean that people traveling or people in the industry are like, you know, are old or outdated, but the systems that we use have been around forever. So when you throw something new into it, everyone's like, what is going on here? And so, yeah, I mean, it's changed even over like the, you know, 2.5 years that I've been at Fly Now Pay Later. Our objections and concerns from travel merchants are evolving. And so whereas before people are like, oh, is that going to kind of tarnish our brand image? Like, you know, we're a luxury tour operator. We don't want to have to offer these payment services. Where now, and I think this is because you are seeing it everywhere. You're seeing it across all types of websites, luxury or not, that people are less worried about it maybe tarnishing their brand image. And maybe more like, okay, like logistically, how is it going to work out? When do we get paid? How does the payment flow work? Like, you know, what is our relationship with our customers? How do cancellations and refunds work? So those are the, I don't want to call them objections, but that's what's being flagged more and more now, obviously because of COVID, I think, with refunds and cancellations. But to give kind of a blanket answer to that is that it doesn't disrupt that flow at all. Like if your customer is going to get a refund and they booked with Fly Now Pay Later, they'll get the exact same refund that they were to get if they didn't. So if there's no interruption, it's just, you can think of it as just part of the process in terms of, you know, misaligning it.
Is there an opportunity through adopting this concept or this model for brands to use it as a way of building loyalty? Because on the one hand, you think, well, yes, of course, because if people have the chance to buy now and pay later, that they think that's a great idea and they'll come back. But there is also, you know, the flip side of that is possibly they may be having difficulty paying. So this may be only a once every 2-year trips. And that's a very inherently difficult thing to get loyalty from, is incredibly infrequent travelers.
So we actually see, so our biggest customer demographics are millennials, obviously younger consumers, because they're the quickest to pick up on these things. They're not as attached to credit cards as, let's say, older generations are. And you know, just with technology, they adopt things quicker. But just on that, is it also reflected in the fact that they perhaps don't have as much disposable income as well? Is that a correlation? So that could be one, but I think it's just in general, they're more likely to kind of pick up on new trends and incorporate them into their daily habits. Mm-hmm. But I also think that so that is one trend, but then another, and I really want to veer away from like the fact that it's not necessarily if you have the money or disposable income up front. I think it's more of just like payment flexibility. Like, do you want to max out your credit card before you go on holiday? Do you want to kind of pay with this option to ensure that when you are on holiday, you can spend all the money that you want? And you don't have to worry about what you already spent on the plane tickets. So that obviously is one demographic, which is hard to count millennials as a demographic because there's so many of them. But another one are families and friends or individuals that make repeated trips back to the same place. So those are people that are visiting their family, visiting relatives, visiting friends in another location. And let's say they make a annual, biannual, every 2-year trip to the same place. And they know that they're going to have to spend a large amount of money every year, you know, twice a year, every few years. Those are the people that are using our product as well. And so in offering our solution, I mean, I think it's one of the benefits that we talk about with merchants is you're kind of building that loyalty because you're showing them that you have these flexible payment options for them. So if they do have to continuously make this trip, that they can book in advance, they can capitalize on, whatever early bird discount that site's offering because they'll have that flexibility. They don't have to wait till they save up that money later on.
Is there a role in all this that somehow plays into a company's overall kind of growth strategy at all?
Definitely. So in offering, I mean, just like I'm going to try to make this as straightforward and not pack as many things in here as I can, but quite simply, if you have, I mean, just like the optics of it all, if you have a 1,000 pound trip, okay, and it says 1,000 pounds, and then if you say spread the cost over, make it easy, over 4 months, and then you see 250, and that's the value that you have. Like having this lower upfront basket value drastically increases your conversion rate. And we've seen that time and time again with all of our merchants. So I think that if you are, let's say you have higher price trips and you're trying to market yourselves to a younger demographic who, isn't going to maybe shell out 3,000 pounds on their next holiday, but and so in offering this, you can have a lower upfront cost. And I think it opens the opportunity up to so many more consumers and I want to really clarify that can't not afford the trip, but that just maybe are safeguarding their money a little bit more. I mean, we run a credit check. We make sure that whoever is using our product is eligible and able to pay it back. So yeah, just want to clarify that.
No, well clarified indeed. Thank you very much. Okay, so last of all then, if we can then, Sophia, I mean, how does this all kind of develop from here? I mean, is the model very set in stone? It is what it is and it's working great and people like it, but how does it kind of evolve, or is this it?
No, I mean, I think the name of the game is flexibility. Like we exist to provide payment flexibility. Most of these buy now, pay later companies are emerging fintech startups, right? And I think as any sort of space that is constantly evolving, you can't create a one size fits model across all industries, across all different demographics, and certainly across all different regions. So just as our company being live in 3 different countries, we have had to adopt the way we collect payments, the way we operate, the way we structure our repayment services in all different regions. So I think that, and these things take time, and we've only been able to kind of really finely tune these things because we've tried it out. And so I think that if we have to view this model, I mean, the model's there, right? Buy now, pay later, but whether we want to do an interest-free product where the cost is associated with the travel merchant, or another model where there's a cost associated with the consumer because that works best for, this certain package holiday. Like, I think it has to be a model that has flexibility within offering the payment flexibility. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. And we are a travel specific payment solution because we recognize how this sort of buy now, pay later model can't be applied to all verticals. And we function differently than other solutions that do operate within e-commerce or fashion, for example. So you have to kind of tweak the model, I think, to accommodate your demographic, your region, and whatever it is that you're selling.
Perfectly put. So thank you very much, Sophia Mellis from Fly Now, Pay Later. Thank you very much for joining us on PhocusWire Pulse for this edition.
Yeah.
Thanks ever so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Speak to you soon.
Hi, I'm Linda Fox. I'm Senior Reporter with PhocusWire. Delighted to be here with Daniel Marovitz, and he's Senior Vice President of Booking.com's new FinTech unit. So welcome, Daniel. Great to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thanks a lot.
So really, the announcement of the FinTech unit was only announced, the first 3 weeks ago, I think it is now. Yeah. So in broad terms, just tell us why Booking.com is getting into FinTech.
We could approach it from a few different angles, but I think maybe the best way to think about it is, Booking.com and many of our competitors have been for years and years, in the case of Booking, more than 2 decades of kind of slogging away, trying to solve lots of problems, but at its heart, the kind of accommodation problem. How does a hotel express the inventory that they have and set pricing and upload photographs and descriptions? How do consumers establish a search and then deal with the complicated results they get and look at consumer reviews and look at photographs and make their choices, right? And I certainly don't want to declare victory. Even though we've been at it for more than 2 decades, it's a devilishly complicated problem, and there are lots of things that we'd love to do better and continue to optimize and enhance. And it seems like no matter how much work we do, there's always a roadmap that's a mile long of things to fix in that core journey. But if I think about it, if I pull the lens back and I think about what we've done in accommodation and the short-term rental space and the hotel space and kind of everything in between, plus rental cars, plus flights, plus attractions, all the things we've added in the last few years, there is one big mountain that we haven't really tackled. And it is a mountain which is the source of a lot of consumer pain and a lot of supplier pain. And so I guess in my mind, the announcement of the FinTech unit and our focus on the space and putting a lot of attention and resource against it is recognition that travel is different than other categories of e-commerce. And financial issues and payments issues are more complicated, cause more pain, cause more friction than the mostly kind of domestic experience people have with e-commerce when they're buying physical goods. Mm-hmm. And it's the last mountain to climb, and we want to climb it. It's a big source of customer service calls. It's a big source of conversations our partner services people have with suppliers throughout the world in markets. And we think there are really great ways to do kind of 3 things, right? To improve and accelerate the experience that bookers have, to improve and take operational cost and operational risk away from suppliers so that we become a even better platform to do business with. And lastly, we think there are opportunities to create really interesting new sources of revenue while reinforcing benefit to both sides of the marketplace. So simple answer, long answer, simple question, long answer, but I hope that helps.
Great answer. So, this mountain that you're looking to climb, travel is kind of intrinsically complicated. It always kind of has been, lots of legacy systems, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess, off the back of a pandemic, when travel is really struggling and we're still kind of unsure, why now?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have leaned right into this problem straight through the pandemic. So we continued to grow, headcount and invest in systems and build relationships with suppliers right through, all of the darkest days of 2020. Certainly there is certainly uncertainty in travel for sure. Of course, that's just a fact. Everybody can read the news and think about their own experience. But we have no doubt whatsoever that travel is coming back, and it's coming back with ferocity around the world, where it can, when people feel safe, when governments allow it, when regulations allow, et cetera. Obviously the vaccine drives in many parts of the world have been really impressive. It's also sad, of course, to see that there are many parts of the world which are really lagging, and the developed world needs to reach out. But we see this need to travel, this desire to travel is really fundamentally human. And we can see from our own data that whenever restrictions come off, there's kind of an explosive burst of travel activity. And we see that happening, all over the place. So we certainly think travel is here to stay, and something that's going to be an important industry and a growth industry for many, many years to come. There will be changes, of course, as a result of COVID, but our fundamental belief in the sector is unwavering in the face of the pandemic. And so we made a decision about whether we would kind of retrench all of our efforts or whether we just kind of double down and push. And that's what we decided to do. And we've continued to build functionality, to build relationships and grow the team to tackle this really tricky problem, which is, payments and financial product that supports travel and experiences.
Cool. And did you kind of have to go to Glenn and say, okay, this needs to be its own unit because we have to purely focus on the fintech side of it? Yeah,
look, we've Glenn and I had many discussions for a long time about it. it's complicated. There are lots of different ways to skin the cat, so to speak, right? And payments are, payments is a weird product. I think you can't deny that, right? You can look at payments from a financial lens. You can look at payments from a kind of purely classical product lens. You can look at payments as a horizontal enabler. You can look at payments and related products as kind of a new business. And it's kind of all those things and none of those things and a combination of those things. And so, particularly as Booking has an unusual history with payments, unlike most of our competitors that leaned into payments, pretty aggressively from their earliest days, including some brands within the Booking Holdings group, like Priceline, which has been doing payments for 20 something years.
Yeah.
Booking had a different approach, right? So we had this agency model where the payments were taken by the hotel, and it was very inextricably linked to our absolute fanatical dedication to this kind of A/B testing optimization methodology, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which has been kind of a hallmark of how we operate. And there are enormous, astounding pluses associated with that model. I think it's not disconnected that Booking adopted that model early in its trajectory and achieved a position in the industry that really nobody else has, right? There are lots of reasons for Booking's success, but I think that absolute attachment to data, the kind of unemotional look at A/B testing as the force of things, has been really important. But what it also leads you to do is to try to simplify and take friction out. And so payments and related things were just viewed as a source of friction. And so kind of we kept it aside where many other brands didn't. And it was probably the right decision for a long time, but it also prevents you from doing certain things. It prevents you from adding value to the marketplace, in certain ways. And so that's why we've kind of changed our view on that.
Okay, cool. So what are you thinking in terms of the greatest sort of areas of friction in travel payments currently?
Well, it's a long list, but I'll go through some of them. And of course, we are, as are most of our competitors, we operate in a marketplace which kind of redoubles or quite literally doubles the payments and financial frictions that are connected with travel. It's very different from being a merchant where you have some stuff that you sell yourself. The payment story is a lot easier than than a company whose business is built around facilitating an intermediary and brokering transactions between two parties, which is kind of fundamental to the Booking approach. So what are those problems? Well, the first one, which is kind of obvious, but I think it's interesting to think about it in kind of philosophical terms, is that, if you think about, all the big e-commerce players, right? If you think about, the mighty Amazon, which is obviously, amazing company, everybody has tremendous respect for what they've achieved, and they're kind of the 800-pound gorilla in so many markets. And on the one hand, it's a big global business, but on the other hand, you could argue that Amazon is actually a collection of domestic verticals, very large domestic verticals, but they're domestic verticals. So what do I mean by that? Amazon US is basically shopped by US customers in US dollars in English. And it's serviced by Amazon in the US or by merchants in the US or by Chinese merchants working really, really hard to present themselves as US merchants, right? In Booking.com's marketplace, obviously the less exotic pairings are of course more common, right? Somebody going from Germany to the UK or going from New York to California. Of course, those sort of less exotic pairings predominate. But we do send people from Papua New Guinea to Paraguay. We do send somebody from Chile to Japan. That really doesn't happen in most physical goods e-commerce. So you have payment methods and currencies and kind of payment cultures which are different in different countries that you have to cater for. And it's actually one of the things that we can do as an intermediary business to provide value to both sides of the marketplace is by understanding what those distinctions are and offering that kind of richness of a feature that people expect locally. and also helping people take their local experience across a border. So what do I mean by that? You know, a Chinese booker who wants to pay with Alipay or WeChat Pay, because those are the things that make all of China work, both online and off. You know, when they go to a small hotel in Yorkshire, they've never heard of Alipay. Well, if they book through the booking platform, we can help the Chinese guest pay with the way and in the currency that they're comfortable with, and also make sure that the Yorkshire hotelier gets paid in the currency and in the method that they're comfortable. So essentially, we can insulate both sides of the marketplace from each other's complexity and sometimes opposing desires. So that's one point. I think, you know, there are emerging products around buy now, pay later, and around installments, which we think are important. You know, those have been really common in you know, in parts of Northern Europe and in Brazil and in Mexico, across many parts of e-commerce, not just in travel. Those are really standard. They're relatively new experiences for many consumers in other parts of the world, but
are they
that's
helpful?
quite interesting.
Do you think they're helpful? Are they, you know,
I
are they a
think
sort of
so.
lasting trend?
No, I think so. I think for a number of reasons, right? I think that one is, you know, travel is a category with higher average prices than many other parts of e-commerce, right? So, you know, people are spending hundreds of euros when they buy travel services, whether flights or accommodation or other things, right? If not thousands of euros, right? And, you know, when people buy from most e-commerce places, of course, sometimes people buy a computer, they buy an iPad, which is a pretty expensive item, but they also buy a lot of things which cost $15, right? And so I think the ability to kind of assist conversion with the ability to pay in installments is something that matters, and probably matters more in some respects because the ticket sizes are higher in travel than in many other sectors.
What are the kind of challenges of, you know, enabling the Chinese traveler to pay with the mechanism he or she wants to pay in to that boutique hotel in Yorkshire in the currency and the way in which he wants to pay? I mean, what are the challenges we're talking about there?
Oh boy, I mean, lots of challenges.
Yeah.
You know, it's super complicated, right? And in some level, the fact that it's super complicated, you know, it's a blessing and a curse, right? You know, I would say, but in more ways, I would say it's a blessing. Why is it a blessing? Because, you know, it's something that a company of our scope and scale can afford to invest in and build and research and manage and do the legal work and do tax work and you know, build and manage all these relationships. You know, it's something that we're kind of scaled to be able to do. You know, it's expensive to manage lots of different providers. You know, they all have terms and conditions, their APIs change, the product changes. You have to do quarterly business reviews and look at roadmaps. And so, yeah, the complexity is really quite extreme. There also is, and I think people sometimes forget about this, but, you know, I mentioned it before, and I really think it's true. You know, payments are a product. It's a product experience. It's not just a kind of financial mechanism. You know, if you think about any online flow that somebody goes through, right? And it doesn't matter whether it's travel or whatever, but, you know, you either go directly to some website or you do a search and the search leads you to a page and then you go through somebody's funnel. Frankly, the only part of that funnel that matters is the last step.
Yeah.
Do you or don't you, right? Do you hit the button and commit? You know, it's the difference between aspiration and commitment, right? And so getting people across that last hurdle, you know, the famous abandoned shopping cart problem that people have been talking about since 1996, you know, it's a big deal. It's not a small thing, right? And so how do you make somebody feel comfortable? How do you make the experience relevant? How do you present options so that you give them flexibility, but you don't overwhelm them? How do you make sure that you're able to save data so that you can, you know, smooth that process and don't leave people fumbling for their wallet to find the card and running up and down stairs and all that stuff? And making sure that, you know, what you present to a Chinese guest is different than what you present to a Dutch guest is different than what you present to an American guest, because the payment brands and payment cultures are actually different. And really, really different, right?
Yeah, really different. What can you share in terms of the opportunity for new revenue streams for Booking.com and the fintech unit?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think some things I would say kind of watch the space. There'll be more information from us over time for sure. But there are opportunities in foreign exchange for sure. I think we have an opportunity to try to take risk and take fear out of the travel process. And I think everybody has had the experience of, in the olden days of, waiting for the Amex statement to show up where you open the envelope. Now, of course, it shows up as an email, or as an alert on your phone. But, I think a lot of people, when they travel abroad, they cross a border and they cross, let's call it a currency boundary. Mm-hmm. They open that statement, however it is delivered, with some trepidation to see, did I get charged a terrible foreign exchange rate? How much am I actually paying in sterling, for my trip to Korea, right? Mm-hmm. I did some math when I was in that store in Seoul before I bought that thing, and I thought I knew what I was spending. And then you open the bill and you say, wow, that's a big number. Or you get hit with, £2, £4 of cross-currency fees or sure. cross-border fees. And so we think that our ability to, we think that there is an ability for us to decrease the cost for consumers, decrease the risk and the kind of anxiety for consumers. Mm-hmm. And we also think there's an ability for us to make margin while achieving that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned data a few minutes ago, and the credit card companies are often talking about them being the sort of ultimate collector and holder of data. So how might data that you collect help drive personalization going forward?
Well, look, I think in lots of ways. I mean, the first thing I would say is that data is kind of core, as we talked about before, right? Data is core to our business, and I think there are obviously lots of companies that have gotten good at kind of a data-centric way of operating. But, for Booking.com in particular, it is very much woven into the fabric of our genetic code mm-hmm. as an organization, right? So we are a company that is kind of committed to, not committed to good ideas, we're committed to good experiments, right? So, if you have a great idea, it's kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. If you have a great idea where you can generate a great experiment and then prove with data that your idea is right, then people get excited, right? Yeah. And I would say across my career, I've been at Booking coming up on 4 years. I've never experienced a company which is so intellectually honest about how it approaches product development problems in this truly, absolutely data-driven way. And so I think, what we're doing in the fintech space is not a world away from what happens across the rest of the company. The only thing I would say is that maybe in the fintech space, because financial stuff is so inherently, organically quantitative, it's easier, right? Yeah. It's harder to design good experiments about whether a light pink or a darker pink on a button drives more or less conversion, right? And we do those right. kind of experiments all the time, and we can find statistical correlations between a light pink and a darker pink, in a UI. But when you're dealing in the financial space, it's so obviously quantitative. It makes it maybe easier.
Okay, look, we're on time here, but let's just finish with this. Do you think travel payment standards are needed? There was one, I think the Open Payment Alliance started up last year, and I just wondered what your thoughts on that were.
I guess from which perspective? So I think there are a lot of different.
Yeah, so basically, do we need to have, for things like cross-border? That's an obvious one. There must be other areas where you would see standardization proving helpful, useful to consumers and suppliers.
Look, I think what's difficult about travel as a sector, and we talked about this before, right, is that it is this inherently cross-border and therefore multi-jurisdictional experience. Mm-hmm. And the thing about money, with the almost exception of the European Economic Area, but of course it has exceptions. Even outside of Brexit, right? You have exceptions with Sweden, for example, and Denmark, which still maintain their own currency, even as members of the union.
Sure.
With the exception of the EEA, anytime you cross a border, you cross a currency boundary, and currencies are derived from governments, which are derived from central banks, which are derived from governments. And so getting to commonality around these things is really, really difficult. Even within, the European Union, there are distinctions. There have been a few things which have been achieved around interchange caps to try to promote the use of direct debit and debit cards as opposed to credit cards. So there's some things that have been achieved there where there is some commonality, but there still are differences country by country within the EEA. So I think it's very difficult to kind of get to standards, just because it's the power to regulate payments comes from central banks, which are inextricably linked to a specific sovereign government.
Okay. I'm sorry to say we have to leave it there. I would say thank you very much for the insight. This has been a great conversation. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, it's Linda Fox, Senior Reporter, PhocusWire. I'm back again, this time with Will Plummer, CEO of Trust My Travel. Welcome, Will.
Hi, Linda. You're working very hard today. Straight in, back to back.
We were allowed to pre-record a few sessions here and there, but yeah, thank you. So your company, Trust My Travel, does what it says on the tin, I'm presuming. And right now, the role of trust in payments is incredibly important. You would probably say that it's more important than ever. Just talk us through what you're thinking there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are two sort of elements of trust within a payment sort of cycle. So firstly, you've got your standard PCI secure pages. I really hope everyone that's sort of dealing in e-commerce is taking care of that right now. But when we're talking about trust in travel, and certainly post or during this pandemic, it's about how you can get that booking, how you can get that payment across the line. I mean, Daniel was talking about it in the last thing. It's about that funnel where you need to get that payment into your company's pocket ultimately. So actually, Travelport did a survey not so long ago, and the key things that came out of this in terms of trust were people are looking at, will I be safe? As a company, will you deliver? And if you don't deliver, am I going to get my money back? Where's my money going, and what the mechanism is for that? And I think, certainly looking from a UK and probably European perspective, there's been all sorts of issues with the sort of refunds, the credit notes, Atol Abta talking about all those things. And I think as a consumer, you're going, well, why do I want to book with this travel company versus that travel company? And I think it does come down to trust now. I trust them that the money is going somewhere safe and that I know exactly where it's going to be throughout the whole process.
You're right. And I mean, lots of consumers got burned during the pandemic with refunds, and they still, we're still hearing those stories. People trying to get their refunds. So how do we go about then restoring that trust?
So, I mean, first and foremost, and I perhaps would say this, I mean, I think we need to get better as an industry at looking at financial protection for consumers. I mean, in Europe, we've got the package travel regulations, which, requires a travel company to put money into escrow or have an insurance policy or a bond in place. I think that needs to be shouted about. I think it needs to be potentially expanded into other regions. You're handing over a lot of money. I don't think it's unreasonable that there is some kind of concession to the security of that money. But I also think there needs to be greater transparency around terms and conditions. I mean, how often is a terms and conditions simply a link on a checkout page or a tick box? I would suggest that not a lot of people read terms and conditions. That potentially more fool them. But that's the crux of the whole situation. And I think you need to be very clear on your terms and conditions. And I would suggest people need to highlight them a little bit better. People want to know what's happening and their right to get money back in in circumstances, there are so many varying circumstances right now. I think there needs to be greater clarity on that.
I saw something from eMarketer. I think it was something like mobile payments increased more than 20% during the pandemic. So what I was going to ask you was, do you think, trust will almost come by force of habit because, we just get so used to doing mobile payments, same as we've got so used to doing Zoom and virtual events, that that trust will just come back in an almost natural way?
I mean, I hope so. I think there's kind of a bit of a crux in terms of the longer we are restricted, the longer that people, can't get out, can't spend money, certainly abroad. I think, unfortunately, more companies will fall by the wayside. So there probably will be more of a change and a much needed change, and those habits will change, as you're suggesting. I think there is a danger which, while I want everyone to get back to business as quickly as possible, that as soon as the forces of money rear their heads again, it will be back to sort of a little bit the Wild West in places. I'm not saying that's across the board, but I think actually there's an opportunity to make some decent changes within the industry, and that does revolve around payments. That does revolve around the security of customer money.
And when you say Wild West there, is that because you think that we just all in the industry be so kind of desperate to make some money back that we won't kind of seize these opportunities?
I don't want to say all, because I'm picking on a few bad apples, and that's unfair. But I think that there have been issues where you look at travel companies that are selling discounted holidays for 2022, 23, and you think, well, that's to get cash in the bank and to sustain their business. That is a minority, don't get me wrong, and I'm not going to cast aspersions otherwise. But I think, we have picked up a bit of a bad reputation as an industry. And I think in order to restore, trust in the industry, in order to actually maintain the companies that are doing it right, we do need to get something in place. We do need to have the people that are using Zoom, that are using mobile payments, getting used to calling into question the companies that they're booking with.
And I mean, that would require a real kind of fundamental change there, because when you think about travel and tour operators, online agents, the margins have been so thin traditionally that that's how they've had to conduct business. So do you see consumers driving that change to putting in place something different, or how might that happen?
I think you need to look at some of the trade bodies. They're obviously working hard to do that, but I think they found supply for themselves lacking. I also think that no one expected Armageddon in the travel industry. No one expected COVID to come along, and I think it's called into question a number of things. And I think there is an opportunity to rebuild, but it will be consumer driven. I think the people that are going to benefit, or the companies that will benefit on the flip side of this, are not the ones that are selling the cheapest trips. They're the ones that are doing it right. They are gaining that trust. They're gaining that reputation for looking after the consumer. And as I say, it's about safety, obviously, with COVID, all of the restrictions on that. But it is about, will you deliver my service? And if you don't deliver my service, how am I protected?
Okay, let's move on here. We read a lot, probably on a daily basis now, about fraud, and payment fraud is one of the big ones in travel. So what are the kind of safeguards that travel companies need to put in place? And, is it easy for them to put these safeguards in place?
No, that's the honest answer. I can't remember the statistic, but for every pound a bank spends in sort of fraud, preventing fraud, the fraudsters are spending a lot more. They're highly sophisticated. Travel, with its long lead-in times, largely card not present situation, it is ripe for fraudsters, unfortunately. But there are a lot of good companies out there. The acquirers, the banks do work incredibly hard. But it comes down to merchants taking responsibility, doing their bit as well. And while I'm not sure you're talking about with Daniel about having a standard for payments, certainly it is about coming together and working together on things like fraud, because you can recognize behaviors, you can recognize exposures, you can recognize, stolen cards, trends that aren't expected. And I think that's what it really needs in that side of things. But look, it's not easy, and unfortunately, when it comes back, I think travel as an industry will be sort of ripe for it again. So as a merchant, you need to be very cautious, put decent policies in place, and if you're engaging with a customer, if you have the opportunity as a business to do that, because nothing eradicates the fraudsters than that kind of communication.
And again, obviously, that comes back to building trust. So
Exactly.
You're right. I did talk to Daniel a little bit about standards and whether they were necessary. And really, Daniel and I talked about cross-border payments. But what about kind of B2B payments?
In terms of standards, or just in general?
Well, generally, the challenges and then standards as well.
I think there are a lot of challenges insofar as what's become very popular at the moment is virtual cards, a lot of prepayments. With that, again, COVID's shown up some issues with that, exposed people on that side of things. But then the banking system isn't necessarily any better. Utilizing a SWIFT, if you've got to make international transfers, has its own issues. Not least, you can't get your money back easily unless the receiving party is, prepared to play along with that. Do I think there need to be standards? I think it would be something that would be incredibly hard to do specific to the industry. Payments is such a big beast, whether it be from an acquiring side or whether it be from an issuing side. And, travel, yes, makes up a decent proportion of that, and obviously has a lot of the cross-border side of things. But, as you were talking about with Daniel, the issues apply whether it be B2C or B2B around governments, banks, own banking policies. You only need to look at how they sort of don't want to adopt crypto, which, has its own challenges, but, to realize that standards will be very hard to implement. And it's about working with, I think, a number of different solutions around the world, subject to what fits your business.
Okay, just going back for a minute to something you said earlier on about, just in things like terms and conditions and flexible policies. And we have seen a lot of improvements around those in the last kind of 6 months. But what kind of, what more should travel companies be doing around those things to show that they're, open for business and secure?
I mean, whichever country you are, obviously has or typically has regulation around what you can do. Certainly for tour operators and people that are putting together packages, not so much for your hotels or your tours and activities providers. But even so, I think it's about demonstrating that you're going the extra mile. Perhaps you might run your own escrow account, or perhaps you might tell your customers how you're protecting their money. I mean, I work with an actual STR verification service, and they're very much about building a trust page on your website. So demonstrating to your consumers how they can trust you, or how and why they can trust you, basically. And then back to the terms and conditions, I think too often we hide behind them in terms of when there's a problem. I mean, they're not used if everything goes okay. But I think now it's about, and potentially around that trust page and building that trust, it's about showing consumers that this is what happens if there is a cancellation. This is their right to a refund, and for whatever reason, so that they've got clear visibility with the company that they're booking with, that's what you're going to do. And if it's non-refundable, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that, but say it so there's not a battle later on. And I think the key is about highlighting, some of the key things that you're doing to build that trust and to get people through the door. I think that's the key thing as travel starts up, and ensuring that travel companies survive.
So, I mean, I guess greater transparency in general.
I think so, yeah.
So we're seeing lots of new kind of payment mechanisms now. You've got book now, pay later. You've got sort sort of pay in installments, and there's lots of interest around those. Some of the startups in that area are getting, significant funding, but I understand you're not a fan.
I'm not particularly a fan. I mean, I can see it from a merchant's perspective, and listening to Sapphire earlier, I get it. We've investigated it ourselves before. It does help drive, the basket value up. It does offer flexible payment terms. I think it's probably a bit in its infancy at the moment. I mean, if you look certainly in the UK at how, the likes of Klarna and ClearPay are going to potentially be further regulated, I'm not convinced there are adequate checks being done. That's purely, my personal opinion. I'm sure they're doing their absolute due diligence, but I think, again, it's a confidence thing. We don't want another credit crash like we had before. We don't want pressure on individuals. And I think it does come back to that trust. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think they, again, have got to demonstrate that they are trustworthy themselves and how they're doing it. From a merchant, I think it's great, but it is that merchant consumer trust that we've all got to build up and restore.
And I mean, likewise, in terms of trends, we're seeing, lots of new local payment options coming through, and, currency options, and sort of just basically more and more of letting people pay they want to the suppliers. So, how important is that, do you think?
So again, listening to Daniel just before me, I mean, I think if we were talking in 2019, I mean, that was something that we shout a lot about as well ourselves, the need to localize that payment type. The guy who was going to stay in Yorkshire and using his Alipay to make that payment, fundamental, and then to be able to pay the suppliers in their own currency. It will come back. I feel that absolutely, as things grow and as you get customers back, that does become important to keep costs down, to maximize your revenues and your profits. Sort of day zero is, well, we're probably not day zero, but day 1 or 2 back in the travel reopening, you've got to get people through the door. And I think, if you look at the trends, we will see a lot more domestic travel. We will see a lot more localized travel because regions have different uptakes and, scope to take passengers from different parts of the world. So it is important. It needs to be part of a strategy. I'm not sure it's quite at the top as it was 2 years ago, but it will come back.
So if, alternative payment methods and then, sort of book now, pay later schemes are kind of trends, what are the other trends that you would see currently, and perhaps ones that you think are worth watching?
In terms of new stuff, I mean, I think one of the things that people forget is that a lot of these things, digital wallets, etc., are still built on card rails. And you look at the Visas and MasterCards of this world, they really don't want that business to go away. So North America, large parts of Europe, obviously, card is still the most preferred type of doing things. But I think you will see those programs actually supporting acquirers in firstly taking travel merchants again. There's been a movement away from taking them, but also helping them in building that trust. We've been talking to a number of different brands, different acquirers around how they can actually mitigate the risk of a failure, but also push out to the consumer that kind of protection. So the payment types, I think, have all been spoken about, the localized side of things, but I think you will also see new initiatives come within those payment types. So around the security of funds, encouraging customers that they can trust that payment type and also trust that company, and hopefully better educating so it all comes back, and ultimately we're not just left with a big pot of sort of chargebacks and issues like that, which obviously alternative payments help to minimize, but I'm not necessarily sure that that's the right way. And I think you'll see more of a progression from a lot of the traditional solutions as well.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time here. So just very quickly, crypto, is the travel industry ready for it?
is anyone ready for it? I don't know. It does come back to this standards for me in terms of adoption. I know there are some companies that have taken crypto or take crypto and done it very successfully. But I think the very fact that you're talking about, businesses in different countries, yes, crypto would seem to fit into that, but you're still coming back to this governmental control, this banking control. And I think in terms of that, because of the diversity of things, ultimately people will get caught out. And I don't think right now we're there. I think if crypto got adopted by governments, that would be a different story. But we're not ready for it yet.
All right. Well, Will Power, CEO, Trust My Travel, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Linda.
Next up is a big picture for travel payments with Thomas Heldorf of WorldPay.
Hi, Thomas. Thomas Heldorf, Vice President of Airlines and Travel at WorldPay from FIS. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, what we're going to do over the next 18, 19 minutes or so, Thomas, no pressure, of course, is try and give a really kind of good overview of the state of the nation, the big picture of payments. Now, if anyone wants to get any of the finer details of what the kind of things that Thomas talks about, us and WorldPay from FIS have done quite a few webinars over the last 18 months, and frankly, they're incredibly good. And there's a lot of data and bigger trend analysis in those, so you can go back and watch those. So a little plug for some of our old webinars there, Thomas, that we've done many of together. But first of all, then, if we can kick things off, is it fair for me to say that the payments landscape, if we can call it that, has been largely unaffected by the last 18 months from a COVID perspective, other than not a lot of payments have been made?
Well, thanks. First of all, welcome, and thanks, Kevin, for the invitation. It's been a real turmoil, I would say, from a payment perspective, in particular for the travel industry, as in, not so much has changed from a consumer perspective. Consumers still pay the same way that they used to pay. They pay a lot less because they travel a lot less. But from a merchant perspective, from a travel agency and airline perspective, it has become a lot more difficult to accept those payments. And that's because many of you will know the acquirer takes the risk for transactions and takes the risk for transactions should an airline default. Now, should an airline default, the acquirer has to pay all unflown tickets because, of course, the consumers are protected against the cases when services have not been rendered. So they can go back to the issuing bank and says, I forgot my flight, I want my money back. And the issue goes back to the card schemes go back to the acquirer. And if the airline is no longer there, the acquirer has to pay. Or if the travel agency is no longer there, the travel agency has to pay. So that risk has gone up significantly, especially since the pandemic. Not only did the airline make default, but also the chargeback risks. There's a lot of open chargebacks. There's a lot of vouchers that have been issued. So it's a really unclear landscape for acquirers to understand how much liability do they still have with this sector. So it's been a really difficult times for airlines, for travel companies to find acquirers and to work with them and work out a risk mitigation compromise in terms of how much are the airline acquirers willing to take that risk. So yes, on the consumer side, very little has changed, very little has progressed in terms of variety of payment methods, in terms of new ways to take payment. But behind the curtains, massive movements and massive things have happened. The whole chargeback, all the refunds, it's been a real nightmare for many of us. So
I've got 10 different subjects that we can get through here, but I do want to kind of continue this point just briefly. Is there light at the end of the tunnel for this mess that you've just so described to us?
There is, and some acquirers more than others are taking the opportunity to deepen their relationship with the market. So we're just in the process of signing up a lot of new airlines who are have to find new acquirers, have to find a second acquirer because they've had only one and they want the backup, because they saw that these relationships can change very quickly. So we are working with a lot of them to highlight their situation and work with them. Say, look, guys, you need to it's sound business to have two acquirers to have a redundant setup, and working with them through. I mean, we've gone through the worst. We've gone through all the refunds where we sometimes had to pre-fund the refunds and then later got the money back from the airlines because they were not used to pay us. We were paying them. That has changed, and you can imagine with some of the governmental airlines in the middle of a pandemic, they have to find ways to pay their acquirer. Not an easy situation, in particular at the beginning of it all, when nobody knew what was happening and how to resolve it. So it is changing. We see sales have long surpassed chargebacks and refunds. So there is certainly an improvement of the situation, and we have found ways to mitigate the risk. So we've built risk tools that help us to understand the risk and to balance the risk between the airline and ourselves. So it is changing, and I see a lot of industry players getting ready to step into the market and once the situation improves, also to join us again in that space.
One of the most interesting parts that we've done, as I mentioned at the beginning, we've done a series of webinars with you over the last couple of years, and one of the ones that seems to have taken place in the autumn each year is the results of a survey that you do that looks at different payment types, what type of devices people are using, the whole thing. And it's the data that comes out of that is fascinating. I just wondered if, Thomas, you could talk us through what some of the interesting, perhaps, results that you might see if you do that same survey again, in things that are shifting to different types of services and payment types.
So I think one of the things is what is really easy for airlines and travel companies to do is optimize their website. I mean, we've just previously in the previous discussion heard is the trust that consumers have in your website. And there's a lot of little things that you can do to build that trust, as simple as putting a lock symbol on the homepage, putting a lock symbol right next to entering the card details. Just that symbol seems to build trust. It's interesting. We were surprised ourselves, but we've had a survey among 33,000 consumers across all different countries around the globe. And we found about 20, 30 different elements that you can build around the entire payment process. So not only on the payment page, but you can start on the homepage displaying the payment methods that you have available, ensuring that you describe the process that you take people through when you have certain payment methods, that you redirect them. There's so many things you can do to improve that experience that don't take much to actually implement. Equally, there's so many things that distract the payment process, and if you don't check the card number for its consistency, there's a check digit, and all you need to do is calculate the check digit while you enter the details and give it a tick when it's right and highlight it when it's wrong before somebody enters that submit button, and then it goes off and comes back with a big arrow and people drop off. So there's so many things you can do really just very simply to increase the conversion. So that is one of the most fascinating things. It's the simple things that you can do.
It's interesting. It's interesting though, because as a fairly regular user of e-commerce sites, that's the kind of functionality that you don't see in a particularly widespread way.
Yeah.
But it seems so simple to do something like that.
Taking the name from the lead passenger and putting that into the card holder name field, like just copy and paste it in automatically, reduces the data entry required, especially if you book on a mobile phone. You have to re-enter a name, type it in again on your phone. It's these little things, and you want to get to almost like the Uber or Amazon experience where you have stored all your passengers' details, and all they need to do is just a fingerprint on the phone, reconfirm the payment method, and it's paid, especially for incremental bookings or incremental service elements, as airlines and travel companies try to sell more, not only at the initial booking, but the insurance, the transportation, taxi, larger seat upgrade, whatever. Use the stored payment details. Just get him to just put the finger and yes, I want it now. So it's this spontaneous purchases that you support with a really, really good, slick user experience.
Talk us through, Thomas, if you can, what are some of the emerging or even new alternative payment methods that the industry should be aware of?
Yeah, so I guess the most interesting is the discussion in this space is the open banking discussion. So should airlines, travel companies adopt open banking? Now, from a merchant perspective, it's brilliant. Open banking is super cheap. It's pennies instead of percentages of transaction value, and I had a lot of queries like, should we implement this? Yes, and yeah, if you look at purely from a merchant perspective, it might be a really good one. Having said that, if you look at it from a consumer perspective, one thing that we covered already is that the trust and the chargeback capabilities and stuff. Open banking doesn't really provide that. You pay, it's done, and that money is gone. And if there's a company goes bust, it's gone. There is no chargeback rights, and you don't get miles, you don't get the insurance, you don't get all these extra bits that customers got used to have around credit cards, and you'd almost need to rebuild those incentives and that protection around open banking to encourage users to use it. So some airlines I've seen, they offer free upgrades, and they go down that route to encourage users of free bags or things to enable them to, or to incentivize users to use those payment methods.
We've talked before, and there's been a lot of discussion in the past about, you know, the cashless travel experience, and, you know, the kind of the emerging role of things such as biometrics, which is obviously part consumer related in the way they interact with how they want to pay for things. Where are we broadly in that kind of new world of being able to pay for things like that?
Yeah, so it's the user experience at the very front that keeps evolving, and fingerprint biometric. It's a beautiful evolvement of having to enter a PIN and any sort of other protection steps, and it's predominantly driven out of, or one element is driven out of the requirement to two-factor authenticate, and this is where governments sometimes step in and almost they think it's gone too far in that ideal experience where all you need to do is click yes or smile or to get your service, and it's almost too seamless, that process. People don't realize that they're buying something, so they want that double step. Yes, I really want to pay, and do you really want to pay? Yes, and you double kind of authenticate your transaction to ensure that it's really you, that it's safe, it's secure, and certainly it helps many to build that trust, but it kind of disrupts sometimes that totally seamless user experience where you just nod or just click yes and it's done. So there's this tension between security, safety. It's all kind of really trusted and this ideal optimal user experience, and everybody's kind of needs to find their own preferences and where they would like to sit. And obviously for the merchants, they sometimes would like to have the easiest way in terms of payment conversion and the highest conversion.
Security always wins, though. In that balance that you talk about between security and brilliant user experience, does it?
I mean, there's the regulation that you have to fulfill, but there's still if you have the conversation between the fraud teams and the sales teams within an airline or within the travel organization, the fraud team, ideally they have zero fraud, but then you just shut down the website and there's no fraud. Brilliant. But that's not what it's about. It's about maximizing sales, and the sales teams like do away with that fraud product because it just reduces my conversion. So it's about the business to decide how much fraud do you accept, and how much. It's almost like, okay, we accept a 0.05% level of fraud because there will always be fraud, and we just add it to the price, and we find kind of a balance between turning away good customers and having no fraud. So the tighter you make your fraud rules, obviously, the more you turn away good people. And the good example was when the pandemic started, a lot of people booked last-minute one-way flights in business class, in all sorts of and this is a typical example where fraud rules normally would kick in early and say one-way tickets expensive, really short-term is something I turn down. So this is where people really quickly had to adjust those fraud rules and like, hang on, these automated tools are good, but I need to I need to adjust it a little bit. So there is always, fraud is always going to be there. It's just a matter of how much fraud do you add to your business case, and find good tools, obviously, that help you to optimize the good transactions and turn down as few good ones as possible, and turn away the bad ones.
Okay. Linda, my colleague, and Will Plummer just a moment ago referenced blockchain and that kind of emerging kind of mechanism. I mean, what's your perspective on that, Thomas?
I think that it sounds intriguing that you open up another payment method and lots of people will pay more flights that they would have bought and paid for before. I've seen a couple of implementations. All of them use an exchange where they obviously immediately convert the digital currencies into fiat currency, so the airline knows what they get. They wouldn't natively accept bitcoins because they keep changing the value, and airlines traditionally hedge every currency and everything, so they wouldn't necessarily want to have bitcoins and get into the business of speculating with bitcoins. So there is a way to safely accept cryptocurrencies and digital currencies. What I would though say is that what about the unhappy path? What about the refunds? What about all these kind of where you try to issue a ticket and it didn't work and you need to kind of cancel that transaction? These use cases, these edge cases, they're not so easily doable with exchanging fiat or crypto into fiat, and then you have it, and all of a sudden you don't want that transaction, and then you want to convert it back, and then prices have changed, and you only get half of your bitcoins back, or you do a refund a week later because that flight is being cancelled. So all these edge cases, digital currencies are not really geared up for these kind of transaction types. Open banking is easy for the happy path, but it's hard to adjust to and find a way around all these other use cases, the unhappy paths.
And as we come to the end here, we've inevitably just whizzed through all this and not come to some of the topics that I wanted us to cover. But what is kind of coming next in the world of payments? And that seems a really kind of glib question to ask, but perhaps not for me. But if I was a travel executive, what is coming that's going to kind of set my hair on fire because I haven't thought of it yet, or it's going to be a big headache to implement technically or financially or through any of the other things that payments can cause issues for? What's next?
Yeah, so two things I see coming and interesting. One of them is the whole B2B payment process. That is really very old in the airline world and really not working very well in the travel agency to supplier world. There are options. There is the virtual credit cards. There's the BSB cash. Some are really expensive. Some are really kind of might need a refresh, a technical refresh. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to look into that space and optimize the whole B2B flow in terms of how the money is moved, how the money is guaranteed, how it is ensured that the downstream suppliers are actually going to survive, or the upstream suppliers are going to be there, and when there's a chargeback. So the whole ecosystem, the dependencies and the guarantees for each other, I think there's a huge opportunity to do a lot in that space.
Just on that then, because it would be such a fundamental change. Is it if it's the airlines side of things, is it an organization like IATA that is or should taking the lead, or is it going to happen a bit more organically because airlines themselves are demanding some really big changes because the system is not working for them?
Yeah, so I think NDC is a good opportunity because the payment flow around NDC is still very fragmented, open, and I hope that there are solutions going to come up, and then with the help of IATA, we can standardize some of those solutions and make them industry solutions. So this is the way I hope things are going to move. And then from a B2C side, I think an interesting development are the digital currencies that governments are issuing, the CBDCs. How are we going to be able to accept them? Could we use those for B2B payments as well? So how do we adopt our industry standards, the IATA standards around the tickets, the forms of payments in tickets? Once those digital currency units arrive and are becoming commonly accepted, how do we embed them into our ecosystem? So that's a really interesting one for me, and I think we should keep an eye out for those. As China is already testing them, the US is working on them, UK, Singapore, lots of governments are working on those, and knowing the time it takes for us to adopt our industry to anything new, it'd be a good time to start the thinking now, to be ready in whatever 3-5 years or even shorter to actually be able to accept those.
Okay, so lots of things there to keep you out of mischief as well as everybody else in the travel industry. So Thomas Heldorf from WorldPay from FIS, thank you very much as always. Good to see you, and thanks for finishing our FocusWire Pulse off today. So that's enough from me and my team. I'm just going to hand over to Pete Como, the Managing Director of Focusrite. Thanks again, Thomas. Thanks ever so much.
Good evening. Good afternoon.
So once again, thanks a ton to our speakers for supporting this Pulse event today. So we had Mike, Sophia, Daniel, Will, and of course, Thomas, as well as a great APAC panel that Soo-Hoon helped put together, Alvin, Chan, Ken, and Chu. Obviously, stellar moderation from the FocusWire team, Linda, Mitra, and Kevin. And thanks again to Soo-Hoon for making a guest appearance. Appreciate Salesforce helping sponsor the Pulse series of events. We do have a few coming up in the next 3 months, so stay tuned to the FocusWire newsletter for digital marketing, which is coming in August, short-term rentals in September, and startups and investments in October. On the virtual event front, we have a think tank tomorrow, which is focused on the digital nomad, where we will bring together a small, diverse group of participants with leaders from Festive Road and Airbnb to dive deep into this topic. Unfortunately, this one is full. However, you can sign up for future think tanks on Focusrite.com. On the content front, we've put together a ton of excellent content lately on FocusWire. We just released a report last week on influencing and activating travelers through social content, which was in collaboration with Tint. So there's a ton of great Focusrite research integrated into that report, so you can download it through the partner section on FocusWire. And lastly, but certainly not least, we are busy preparing for the Focusrite conference in November in Florida, where we will bring together the travel industry for the first time in way too long. And based on early registration, the industry is anxious to meet once again in person, and we hope to see many of you there. Thanks a lot, and have a great rest of your day.